They read the team sheet over the tunnel speakers at 2:30, 90 minutes before the biggest match of my career, and my name wasn't on it. I found out the way you find out the worst news of your life, which is that somebody else has to say it to your face because you refuse to believe a piece of paper. My manager, Terry Vance, stood in the doorway of our dressing room at the iron yard with the team sheet still warm from the printer, and he wouldn't look at me properly. "Danny," he said, "you're not starting. You're not even on the bench." 1 hour. That's how much warning I got before a championship title decider that would send either Redbrook United or Kingsmere Athletic into the Premier League for the first time in either club's history. I was the captain. I'd scored 22 goals that season, more than any other midfielder in the division. And with 60 minutes on the clock, I was being told to take off my boots. My name is Daniel Okafor. I'm 29 years old. I've worn the number 8 shirt at Redbrook United for 6 years, and until that Saturday in May, I would have told you Terry Vance was the closest thing to family I had in football. That afternoon, he couldn't hold my eyes for more than 2 seconds at a time, and I should have understood right then that whatever was happening to me wasn't his decision. I just didn't understand it yet. "Why?" I said, not a question, a demand. "I can't tell you right now. Get changed, sit with the physios." I want to tell you I argued, that I grabbed him by the training top and made him explain himself in front of the whole squad. I didn't. 11 years as a professional teaches you that when a manager's voice goes that flat and quiet, something above his head is moving the pieces, and shouting at him won't move them back. So I sat down on the bench in the away end of our own dressing room, wearing a suit instead of a kit, and I watched 22 players who weren't me get ready to play the match I'd spent 6 years waiting for. Redbrook United had never been in the Premier League. We were a town from a city of 60,000 people, built around a ground that held 28,000 on match day, and a boyhood dream that most of our supporters had stopped believing in around the time their kids left school. I signed 6 years earlier from League One, when nobody outside our own fan base could have picked our badge out of a lineup. I stayed through 2 relegation battles and 1 takeover scare because Terry Vance told me on the training pitch in the rain in year 3.
"You still using that old number for your betting account verification?" he asked, half joking, while we were both stretching after a recovery session. "The one your cousin set up for you?" I laughed it off. My cousin, Daniel Okafor Jr., we call him DJ to keep the confusion down within the family, had helped me open a savings account years earlier, when I was 19 and useless with paperwork. And somewhere in that process, our names and a shared family phone line had gotten tangled in a database that neither of us had ever bothered to untangle. It was a joke between us. DJ used to say we were the same man with different postcodes. I told Reyes I hadn't thought about that account in years, and he nodded and moved on to ask about my ankle. I didn't think about the conversation again until Saturday, when it stopped being small talk and became the reason I was sitting in a suit an hour before kickoff. The second thing I should have noticed happened on Friday. Our kit man, a quiet man named Baz, who'd been at the club longer than anyone, mentioned to me almost as an afterthought that someone from the league's integrity unit had visited the training ground that morning. Nobody knew why. Baz thought it was routine, the kind of spot check that happens before any high-stakes fixture. I thought so too. I had no reason to think it involved me. The third thing happened an hour before I was dropped, though I only understood its meaning much later. I saw Paul Reyes standing outside Terry's office, phone pressed to his ear, talking low and fast, and the moment he saw me coming down the corridor, he ended the call mid-sentence and slid the phone into his pocket like it had burned him. I said good morning. He said good morning back, too brightly, and walked past me faster than a man walks when there's nothing wrong. 3 small things. On their own, none of them meant anything. Together they were the whole story, and I didn't have the shape of it until the story was almost over. There was a fourth thing, too, though I only recognized it as a clue in hindsight. On the Wednesday before the match, our captain's meeting with Terry ran long, and when I came out, I passed Reyes in the corridor, going through the following week's training schedule, with Ollie Marsh's name circled twice in red pen. At the time, I read it as ordinary coaching diligence, the kind of thing any assistant does for a promising young player. It was only weeks later, once I understood what his financial stake in Marsh's contract actually was, that the red circles looked less like encouragement and more like arithmetic. What actually happened?
What none of us knew yet was that the phone number belonged to my cousin, DJ, not to me, and that the betting pattern the system had flagged had nothing to do with either of us directly. DJ had lent his phone and the betting account tied to it to a friend of his for the weekend, a friend who worked as a groundskeeper at Kingsmere Athletics training complex and who, it would turn out, had heard enough dressing room chatter about a knee problem in their own squad to think he had inside knowledge worth a bet. He placed 3 wagers against Redbrook using an account that still had my cousin's old, tangled identification details attached to it from years back. The system saw my name. It had no way of seeing the real story sitting 3 layers beneath it. And Paul Reyes knew, or thought he knew, more than he should have. Reyes wasn't just our assistant coach, he was also the informally registered advisor, not quite an agent, but close enough, for a 19-year-old winger named Ollie Marsh, whose breakthrough contract had a clause in it tied to first-team minutes across the season. Marsh was 2 appearances short of triggering an extension worth a great deal of money to both player and advisor. Reyes had heard from a contact who worked adjacent to the betting monitoring service that a flag involving the Okafor name was moving through the system that week. He didn't create the flag, he didn't fabricate it, but when he heard it was coming, he made a phone call of his own on Saturday morning to make sure it landed on Terry's desk before the team sheet went in rather than after, because he understood exactly what an integrity flag 1 hour before kickoff would force the club to do. He wanted me out of the side. He didn't need to lie to get it. He only needed to make sure the truth arrived at the worst possible moment for me and the best possible moment for a 19-year-old winger named Ollie Marsh, whose breakthrough contract had a clause in it tied to first-team minutes across the season. Marsh was 2 appearances short of triggering an extension worth a great deal of money to both player and advisor. I watched the first half from the director's box next to our chairman, Marcus Whitfield, who didn't know why I wasn't playing either. Nobody had. We were still a goal down with 20 minutes left when I picked up the ball just inside our own half, and something that had been sitting in my chest all day, somewhere between fury and grief, came out through my legs instead of my mouth. I carried it 60 yards. I don't remember deciding to shoot. I remember the sound of 28,000 people finding out at the same moment that the ball had gone in off the underside of the bar. 71st minute, 1-1. 9 minutes from the end, our right-back swung in a cross that our own top scorer, a Norwegian striker named Henrik Solberg, met with a header that should be shown to every child who ever asks what football is for. 2-1. The Iron Yard made a noise I've never heard from a crowd before or since, and I stood in the middle of it with my arms out and no idea still why I'd nearly missed it. We held the lead. The final whistle went with the ball 40 yards from either goal, and every promise Redbrook United had ever made to a town that stopped believing in it became true in the space of about 4 seconds. I was still on the pitch, being half carried by supporters who'd come over the hoardings, when I saw Marcus Whitfield walking down from the director's box faster than a 61-year-old man in a suit should walk, straight past the pitchside stewards, straight down the tunnel toward our dressing room. I followed him in, still wearing my kit, sweat and confetti and everything else still on me, because I wanted to hear this conversation with my own ears. Terry was sitting on the physio's table when Whitfield came through the door, and the chairman didn't wait for the celebrations to die down. Someone is going to explain to me why my captain was standing in the stands an hour before the most important match this football club has played in its history, and why I found out about an integrity flag on his name from a newspaper app on my phone during the first half, instead of from anyone inside this building. Terry explained it the way he'd explained it to me in the tunnel, the rule, the 90 seconds, the impossible choice between saying nothing and breaking a confidentiality requirement that could have gotten the club sanctioned. Whitfield listened, and I watched something in his face soften slightly toward Terry and harden considerably toward the door, because that's when Paul Reyes walked in, looking for all the world like a man who'd come to celebrate. "Paul," Whitfield said, "I had a call 20 minutes ago from someone at the Football Association who wanted to know why a member of my coaching staff had been asking questions about an active integrity investigation 2 days before it was flagged to the club. Would you like to explain that to me, or would you like to explain it to them?" I watched Reyes's face do the thing faces do when a person realizes the version of events they'd built for themselves has just collapsed in front of witnesses. He tried denial first, the way people always do. Then he tried context. He'd only been trying to protect the club, get ahead.
Reyes didn't answer that. He didn't need to. Whitfield asked him to leave the building and told the club's disciplinary process would take it from there. And 3 weeks later, before that process reached a hearing, Reyes resigned. The club never had to prove in a tribunal what all of us in that room already understood, which was that a man with money riding on a 19-year-old's minutes had made sure information reached the right desk at the wrong time for me and the right time for him. I want to tell you Terry and I sorted everything out that same night, hugged it out under the floodlights and moved on. That's not how trust works, not the real kind. Terry apologized to me properly 2 days later in his office without an audience and told me the rule that had bound his hands and the part of the decision that had genuinely been his to make and wasn't, the part where, if he'd trusted his own read of the situation over the systems, he might have found 5 more minutes to at least look me in the eye and explain what he could before the sheet went up. I told him I understood the rule. I told him I didn't yet know if I forgave the 5 minutes. Understanding and forgiving turned out to be 2 different rooms, and I only had 1 foot in the first one that week. The betting integrity unit closed my case 11 days later. My name was formally cleared, the report noting that the account in question belonged to a third party unconnected to me, beyond a historic administrative link, and Redbrook United published the outcome themselves, rather than waiting for anyone else to write the story for us. DJ called me the night it closed and apologized for something that was never really his fault either, just a chain of small carelessness that ran from a shared account number all the way to a kickoff. Ollie Marsh got his contract extension in July anyway, on merit, after a pre-season where he outplayed players 5 years older than him for a starting spot he'd more than earned. I made a point of being the one to tell him the news, because I wanted him to hear it from me and not from an agent, and because I didn't want a 19-year-old carrying guilt for a decision that was never his. We start our first Premier League season in August. I'll be captain again, same number 8, same ground, 3,000 more seats than we had the year I signed, because the club is building a new stand for people who